How hard is it to get to Canada without taking the IELTS or LMIA? Is it even possible? Well, in today's video, we are going to be looking at different ways you can get to immigrate to Canada without IELTS or LMIA. Hello and welcome to Canada Immigration Guide. Today, we are going to talk about how to immigrate to Canada without IELTS or LMIA. Before that, remember to subscribe, like, share and leave a comment. Many people look to Canada as a destination where they may find fulfilling employment, a safe environment, high living standards, a lively culture, as well as a range of communities to call home. As a result, many people submit applications each year for various immigration programs, and in the process, passing the IELTS score is one of the several requirements for participation in various immigration programs. However, this restriction makes moving to a dream nation a challenge. So, how can you immigrate to Canada without IELTS? And how many instances are there? Well, let's get started. IELTS is an abbreviation that stands for International English Language Testing System. It is a method of demonstrating English competence for those who do not speak English as their first language naturally. Immigrants have been for a long time required to demonstrate their proficiency in English in order to fulfill the requirements necessary for immigration to countries where English is the predominant language. It is a test that has been approved for use in over 140 different nations. You can consider enrolling in IELTS coaching sessions, which are provided by a variety of institutes, in order to do well in your exam. Your results, which are given as bands on the IELTS, indicate the degree of proficiency possessed by the individual. And are there any other tests that may be taken in place of the IELTS? If you don't have IELTS, getting into Canada will need you to complete a lot more steps and tests. In the event that you are unable to get the required score on the IELTS, you do have other available choices. IELTS and CELPIP are two English language proficiency examinations that are required for admission to Canada. On each of these tests, you are expected to utilize correct English. So, is it possible to immigrate to Canada in other ways without taking the IELTS exam? Well, yes. And what are the different ways to move to Canada without IELTS? One of the simplest ways to enter Canada without having to obtain an IELTS score or an LMIA is through the Provincial Nominee Program technology offered by the British Columbia Government, BC PNP Tech. The British Columbia Provincial Nominee Program for Technology was made permanent to assist British Columbian technology enterprises in continuing to be able to acquire and retain international talent even when Canadian citizens or permanent residents aren't available for the position. To be eligible for the British Columbia Provincial Nominee Program, BCPNP Tech Program, which provides a priority pathway to permanent Canadian citizenship, you need to be an expert in one of the 29 tech-related occupations on their website. The absence of a requirement for a labor market impact assessment (LMIA), the ability for BCPNP tech nominees to work during the application process for federal permanent residence by using their work permit support letters, and the availability of BCPNP concierge services once in Canada are all advantages of entering Canada through the BCPNP tech program. A work permit is something that you may apply for in Canada as well. It is often recognized that you may submit an application for a work visa in Canada without first having to pass the IELTS exam. As was said before, the IELTS is only a method for determining whether or not your level of language proficiency is sufficient to enable you to have conversations with native speakers in the nation. Your work visa is the only thing you need to go to Canada for employment purposes. You are required to have a job offer from a company in Canada in order to be eligible to apply for a work visa. However, this is the point at which things start to become more difficult. If your employer rejects your IELTS score, you're gone. So, it's fortunate that a large number of occupations do not need it. The high cost of taking the IELTS is one of the primary reasons why the vast majority of immigrants detest it, not to mention the substantial amount of studying that is required in order to succeed on the examinations. The necessity of obtaining a high score on the IELTS exam is significantly reduced when one takes into consideration the fact that most immigrants come from English-speaking countries. Instead of taking the IELTS, you can consider enrolling in an online English class instead. The IELTS is somewhat more difficult than this test, yet a passing score of any level is acceptable here. To establish one's proficiency in the English language, one certificate is all that is required. One may search the internet and find a lot of different websites that provide English language instruction. Another option is to participate in a provincial nominee program. There is no way to get around taking a language test. However, there are a few provincial nominee programs, PNPs, that have less stringent language criteria if you meet certain requirements, such as having a certain amount of work experience in a province's in-demand profession or a genuine employment offer from a company there. However, there is no way to avoid taking a language test. If an individual has worked for a certain period of time inside a province or has been offered a job by that province, the majority of the country's provinces in Canada will consider nominating them for a position in the provincial government. The nomination by a province is essentially a pathway to citizenship or permanent residency in Canada. It is imperative that you get in touch with an immigration professional if you are thinking about emigrating to a country as an investor, since there may be options available that do not require you to take a language test. If you are a student, try to apply to schools that don't require the IELTS. If you want to go to school in Canada but don't want to take the IELTS exam, your best bet is to look for schools that don't need it. Exams to determine one's level of English proficiency are often only needed by institutions, not by embassies of Canada. If you are able to find a school in Canada that does not require its foreign students to present a certificate demonstrating that they have completed the IELTS, then you may be eligible to do so. For instance, the University of Regina, Carleton University, the University of Winnipeg, Cambrian College, the University of Saskatchewan, and Seneca College in Toronto are the best universities in Canada that do not require the International English Language Testing System, IELTS. Additionally, Canadian universities are also offering an alternative route to overseas students. Instead of taking the IELTS, you can obtain a certificate of English competence. It's easy to do this assignment. If you went to a school where English was taught, just ask for your diploma and show it as an identification of your English proficiency. If you employ this strategy, you won't need to submit to the demands of the IELTS. These are among a number of ways that you can immigrate to Canada without IELTS or LMIA. So, which of these methods do you think suits you best? And would you consider using it instead of doing the IELTS or LMIA exams? Please let us know your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for watching this episode. Hope to catch you in the next one. Peace.